Josh. I'm joined on this early, frosty, and also snowy in Gabe's case Wednesday morning. Gabe, give us a weather report from, I would say, the Great White North, but you're in the dirty South. It's also right now
Mm,
the White South.
yeah, yeah. A lot of sound bites we could use there. Yeah, we got like I think 6 to 8 inches of snow yesterday, which I mean
Never
that
happens.
sounds normal, but yeah, that absolutely has never happened here.
Sheesh.
At least as far back as I can remember.
Yeah.
Even like people who've lived here all their lives were like their minds are blown. So it's pretty cool. Um, all of my kids and Stacy have never seen it snow. Never really
Wow.
been in the snow, so it's been cool to get 6 to 8 inches of snow. It's
Yeah,
like
man.
our cars are just covered, and the roads are just apocalypse out there. So
So for our listeners, your wife grew up in South Florida,
hmm
and you guys are currently now in like coastal Alabama. Like you're
yeah,
not far from the coast at all.
right, yeah,
So there's no like winter contingency plan in places like that. Like they
mm,
don't have
no, no,
salt for the roads. They don't have snow
no.
plows. They don't. Yeah.
It's just Gunner and his 4-wheel drive. That's what.
Hey man,
Yeah,
I ain't nothing, man. I say that. I ain't scared of snow.
yeah. But funny story. We were gonna go over to my mom's. She lives in the same neighborhood as we do, just about 3 streets over. We were gonna go over to my mom's and have some hot chocolate last night about 8 o'clock, and it had been snowing all afternoon, and so we were gonna load up in Noah's Forerunner, and he's like, "Oh, I want to drive in the snow. I want to drive in the snow." Yeah, he loves his Forerunner and stuff, and he's just, um, he's trying to like soup it up and stuff, and
Hmm.
he drives through the yard and out into our cul-de-sac here on the road, does a couple loops, and then comes back to pick us up after he's had the heat going and stuff, and his tires just spin. It just, it's just like the
Yeah.
pavement is just slick and we can't go anywhere, like just zero traction. And he's so frustrated because he's like, oh no, just a little bit of snow. Just like he's been watching all these Forerunner videos and
No,
off-roading videos
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff. And
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like right here in my own cul-de-sac in front of my house, I'm
How
stuck.
embarrassing, man.
Yeah.
That's a
So we
shot to the
canceled that.
ego right there.
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy,
Yeah.
dude. Well, I hope you guys are enjoying it and eating it in. I mean, how long is it going to be around? What are the temperatures like the next few days? Do they think it's going to melt or?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be around for a couple days. It's supposed to get to 36 today, so I don't think that's gonna be enough to really melt
No.
it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it'll be fun. Lots of good family photo opportunities, and
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome, man.
hmm
We had snow here about a week ago, and it came in and it was around for about 2 days. But what we're experiencing now are really, really, really cold temperatures. This morning it's close to around zero.
Ooh,
So it's not fun.
mercy.
Yeah,
I
I'm
know.
kind of over it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Snow is fun, but I think like when you're a kid, it's a lot more fun because you don't have to worry about like going to work and
hmm
you don't have to worry about like, you
Your
know,
water pipes
exactly stuff like that.
bursting and all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
the church parking lot that you got to get plowed so it doesn't
Oh
ice
yeah.
over, so people can actually come to church, So, but
Mm.
yeah, it's fun while it lasts. We had a good time with our kids. We there's a hill down our road, and there's a couple families that live off of this road that we're off of as well. And so we all went out there the day after it snowed and brought sleds and little disc made of plastic, and then there were some kids that brought garbage bags because it was
Nice.
like iced, and we had such a good time sliding down this hill with all of our neighbor friends. So that was really, really, it was good.
Yeah.
It's like a Norman Rockwell painting with garbage
Yeah.
bags.
Yeah. I remember my best frame of reference is like yeah, with hurricanes. Growing up with hurricanes as a kid, it was like that was fun. We got out of school. That was
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah.
And now as an adult, it's like, oh, my
Hurricanes are terrifying.
insurance, my insurance is yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, my insurance is gonna go up. Oh, man, do I make a claim or not make a claim?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah. Oh, my windows, dang it. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, man, that's crazy. Well, inauguration day was 2 days ago. Did you watch the inauguration?
I did. I watched, significant portions of it, which I don't normally do. I just usually watch the oath of office, which is typically very, very brief,
Mhm.
part of the ceremony, but this, I watched large portions of it, went on all day long, which I
Yeah,
guess is normal. That normally happens, but
sure.
it's like fascinating, all the tradition and fanfare that I had no knowledge of. Apparently, that
Right.
it happens every inauguration day. It made me wonder, like, would our founding fathers approve of all this? This is interesting.
Hmm.
Um,
Just like the inauguration balls and the media coverage and the parades and all that
yeah,
stuff, or
yeah, the
yeah,
parades and yeah, it was
yeah,
interesting. It was cool though. I mean, I really liked the parade of when he was I don't know what they called it, forget, but he walked through all the different honor guards of different branches of the military.
yeah, yeah, that was
That
pretty
was
cool.
cool. And they had the army band playing and
Mhm. Yeah, they actually had a band from Stewart's Creek High School, which is, here
yeah,
in Murfreesboro, so,
that's cool.
uh, yeah, that was super cool. I think that, I was just struck by the it was much different inauguration than the first Trump inauguration
Mm.
because it kinda seemed like he won the GOP party back in 2016, and even though he won the GOP party, there was still a lot of folks that were Republicans that were not quite sure about him,
Yeah, yeah.
and at this point in 2025, him coming into office, it feels like the entire Republican Party is united behind him,
Yeah.
and it felt like a very big, like, changing of the guard in the truest sense, like,
Mhm.
not just we get a new president, but, like, new ideologies, um, new priorities as a nation, new things that we're gonna be talking about and not talking about, and, we're
Yeah.
not a s we're not scared to say the quiet part out loud anymore, like him going on there and saying, "Hey, from now on, the US government's only gonna recognize 2 genders," you know?
Mhm.
It's kinda like
Yeah.
we tiptoed around that for the past 10 years, and now he's finally just like, "No, this is what we're doing," you know? So,
Yeah.
that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's definitely a historic year.
Yeah, it is. Interesting to
We
see
got
what
some good
happens.
dance moves out of, Elon Musk. Got some good dance moves out of Donald Trump. I mean, some really good, you know,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
this number there.
Holding on to the fists. It's like you're
Yeah.
invisible. There's like a big toothbrush, kind of, I think.
Yeah.
What would
Yeah.
that be? Like you're eating a corn on the cob and you're just sort of passing it back and forth? Is that what it is?
Flossing? No,
Yeah,
there's
maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know what the kids call flossing. Who knows?
Yeah, that's not flossing.
That's not flossing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think America can maybe find it in their heart to forgive Donald Trump for his terrible
Mm.
dance moves.
Mm. Yeah.
Like what I did there.
What we could do is an entire episode on forgiveness, boundaries, and loving our enemies just to
Mm,
equip people with the biblical understanding
yeah. Yeah.
of forgiveness.
Yes. Mm, that's a great transition, Gabe. That was
Yeah.
smooth.
Episode
Smooth as silk.
118. That's crazy that we have 118 episodes.
I know. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
What are we doing with our lives?
Hmm.
Just sitting here recording podcasts, apparently.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday on what was that on? It was with Ben Shapiro and another guy. Oh, it's on the Journal. Another guy who's like on the opposite end of the political spectrum as Ben Shapiro.
Hmm.
It was on the Journal, the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, okay.
Ben Shapiro and Preet Bharara. I don't know how to
Oh,
say
I
it.
know
He's a
Mr. Barrow.
very leftist lawyer apparently that has a podcast, but they were just talking about the importance of podcasts on the American political landscape in this past year.
Hmm.
It's really fascinating, and we're talking
Yeah.
about how there's a certain age demographic that like they were saying, like basically 40 to 50 and up, they're going to be watching cable news,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
everything
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
beneath that, they're getting their news from podcasts.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so they were just basically saying this last campaign was just a race to get on as many podcasts as possible, and
Yeah. Wow.
They went through the numbers of which candidate did what and how many podcasts they were each on. It was
Mhm.
really, and then they each guest talked about their coming into podcasting and coming into how they broke into that world and um, kind of the freedom that offers. So
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
it's interesting that you and I, you know, no professional training, and well, you took a college class in broadcasting, didn't you? Something along those lines.
Yeah, it's kinda crazy, like, 22 years ago, I
Hmm.
had my own little radio show on,
Yeah,
like, late night SEU radio, and
yeah,
you were a guest on there one time.
yeah,
Do you remember
yeah.
that?
I do.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
you on, and we, talked
Vaguely
about your
remember that.
music because you were doing stuff as a solo artist. This before you and I started playing music together, so,
Yeah,
yeah, but I don't think I learned I think everything I've had to learn about this, it's just been getting out there and doing it. And we
yeah.
started this during COVID because it was like we didn't have much else to do, and so we were like, let's do a podcast. And then really, I think we I was surprised how many people started listening because it was like, man, people actually want to hear what we have to say. And then people started sending in questions, and then people started um, coming up to me in person and saying, "Hey, I really love the show, and could you guys do this or could you guys do that?" And so I've told people, I told somebody this the other day. I feel like at this point, the people who run this show, it's not you and I. Like I don't really feel like this podcast
Mm,
belongs to me and you anymore.
mm,
I
mhm,
know that sounds weird, but I feel like it belongs to everybody who's been listening for the past 5 years.
mm,
Like they're the ones who have kept it going. They're the ones who give us the ideas for content. Like it's honestly without the people listening to this, like we wouldn't be doing this anymore. Um, and so, man, I'm super grateful for our listeners. All that to say, so thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for interacting with it because this is for you guys. This isn't really. I mean, I enjoy hanging out with Gabe, obviously, and we'd still hang out. But I mean, this is uh this is really for y'all because like I get so much joy. I think out of being able to interact with certain ideas and wrestle through biblical text together with people that just I don't know that really fills me up and so yeah
mm.
I'm grateful so yeah forgiveness Gabe, we got some verses on forgiveness because it's pretty hard
Yeah,
to read the Bible and not encounter this idea of forgiveness from the very beginning of the Bible. We read that the character of Yahweh, the God of Israel, is He is a God who is slow to anger and abounding in mercy, and steadfast love, and He pardons iniquity. Right? That's like a very central tenet of who God is.
mm,
But you get into the New Testament, and Jesus comes on the scene, and Jesus is teaching about forgiveness all the time. He's telling parables about forgiveness. He's telling his disciples radical things like if you have anything against anyone, you have to forgive them so that your father will give you forgiveness, which is crazy.
mm.
Um, so there's a bunch of verses that I put in here. Why don't we just you can go back and forth, just read these verses and
Yeah,
kind of use this as our launch point. So you can go first reading Ephesians, and then we'll just go back and forth. And even if you've heard these like 10,000 times, if you're listening to this, really pay attention to what the scriptures would say about what
yeah.
forgiveness means.
This is Ephesians 4:32. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.
Mark 11:25, and whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses.
Then there's Matthew 18:21 to 22. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times.
And that's an interesting one too, because some translations will say 70 times 7,
Mm-hmm.
and some say 77.
Mm.
Which is interesting because I was listening to a teaching on this the other day in Matthew 18, and it was talking about how the rabbinical understanding of forgiveness is like 3 times was as many times as you could forgive somebody.
Hmm. Interesting.
That was considered like the standard, like you were a very generous and gracious, uh, person if you forgave someone
Hmm.
up to 3 times. And so
Interesting.
Peter was saying, "Well, Lord, if I, forgive them 7 times."
Hmm.
Like, this,
Yeah.
the number of completion biblically, is that the perfect amount of time to forgive? And Jesus said, "No. 77 or 70 times 7 is a way of saying you're not supposed to keep record of how many times you
Yeah.
forgive them." So,
Yeah. I also wonder if he's harking back to Daniel chapter 9,
mm.
verses 24 to 27. Um, but we don't have time to delve into that tonight. But or
What
this
what's
morning, this morning. But
whatever time it is, yeah. What is in,
yeah.
Daniel chapter 9?
Uh, Daniel 9:24. Let me type it in real fast. Daniel 9.
You can't just drop a bomb like that and be like, "Yeah, but we didn't
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Just
want to."
77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put
Hmm,
an end to sin and atone for wickedness, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place.
hmm,
Um, and understand this from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the Messiah, the ruler comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens.
hmm.
We'd have to really,
So kinda numerically, it seems like that's on the number of the Messiah or the number of the Messiah's work or the number of
yeah,
atonement or something
or
like that?
it's the time that needs to elapse before the coming of the Messiah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So you can
it's
almost
like it's like the time that needs to elapse in order for the transgression to kind of be finished of, like, I guess the scales of time kind of be even for how long
mm,
Israel has been sinful. But yeah, I'd have to study it out more, but it seems like
yeah.
numerically they are linked, but I'm just not certain
Yeah,
how.
that's
It's
super
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, then Matthew 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses."
Hmm. Luke 6:37, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven.
Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive.
And then Matthew 6:12, forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors.
Yeah. So you can't get around it. You encounter it in the scriptures again in the character of God. You encounter it through the teachings of Jesus all over the place. You encounter it in the New Testament, in the letters to the church. So, Gabe, what would be like a good biblical definition for forgiveness? What is the Bible talking about when it says forgive? What does that mean,
Hmm.
biblically speaking?
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like to give without earning. It's
Hmm.
it's interesting. Like I know the Greek is kind of related to the word charis,
Yeah.
um, which is like the idea of grace. So um, it's granting something to someone when they didn't really deserve or earn it.
Right.
In this case, it's a release
There you
of
go. Yeah.
someone's debt to you.
Hmm. So, like in the parable Jesus tells about the unforgiving servant,
Hmm.
the in Matthew 18, there's the servant that owes the king this unsurmountable debt he can never pay back in 10,000 lifetimes.
Hmm. Yeah.
And instead of the king sending him to debtor's prison or whatever, the king just cancels the debt, basically,
Mm.
and releases him, dismisses him, shows him an act of incredible mercy. He doesn't give him what he does deserve. Instead, he releases him from the debt that's owed.
What's interesting in Matthew 6, with the Sermon on the Mount, forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors, Matthew 6:12. It uses a different Greek word there, aphiemi, which is to leave, to permit, or even to abandon. It's the same word used in Matthew 4 when Jesus calls the disciples, and it says, and immediately they um, they abandoned, they left their nets, they forgave,
Mm.
is how it's
They
translated in Matthew
forgave their nets.
6.
That's super interesting. Huh.
Yeah, they just completely forgot about their nets, like, they just abandoned them
Right.
because they were called, they recognized the calling that was being put on their lives. They were no longer fishermen, so it's this idea of, like, walking away and no longer dwelling on, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, and with that, it almost could, and maybe this is a stretch, but the fact that they left that thing, they left their nets, that thing that maybe they were closely identified with, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe biblical understanding of forgiveness is, if there's any of us that have found some sort of sense of identity in what has been done against us,
Mm,
that we're willing to leave that behind and say, I'm not identified as someone who got, hurt by an ex-spouse. I'm not identified as a victim. I'm not identified as an abuse survivor. I'm releasing that. That's not who I am. I'm
mhm,
abandoning that part of my identity. I'm not just an abuse survivor. I'm not just you know, someone who's been traumatized. I'm releasing that, and I'm following who Jesus wants me to be. Perhaps
mhm.
that's maybe a meaning in that. Maybe that's a stretch, but
Yeah,
maybe that's
that'll
connected in
preach.
that. That'll preach, right? So the and you see this like biblically woven into the parables and the teachings of Jesus. Number one motivating cause behind our forgiveness as Christians is the fact that we have been forgiven an insurmountable debt by God.
Mm,
I mean, that parable Jesus tells in Matthew 18 of the unforgiving servant. The king forgives this guy, this servant, of a debt he could never pay back in a million lifetimes. He has been given this unbelievable act of mercy from a sovereign leader, and then he leaves the presence of the king. He goes and he finds somebody that owes him, 20 bucks, and starts to choke the guy out and demand that, hey, give me my money, give me what's mine, or I'll have you thrown in debtor's prison.
mm,
And so we see this like just absurd contrast between this guy who had been given so much mercy and yet refuses to show any mercy. And it's a way of saying, hey, that's our own heart, right? If
mm.
we understand the
Yeah,
nature of the gospel and we understand how much we've been forgiven by God, then
yeah,
that should be kind of that motivator to say, man, how could I not
mm,
forgive someone? Look how much I've been forgiven, right?
yeah, yeah.
Do you see any other reasons kind of biblically why we're told to forgive other than God says to forgive?
Mm. Yeah, it seems like there's this, interesting relationship between God's forgiving our debts and
Mhm.
our ability to forgive others of their debts. This is kind of an uncomfortable relationship that
Sure.
we kind of have to navigate. But yeah, it's kind of like you said, it's embedded and woven within our faith that we have this supernatural ability and tendency to forgive people's sins against us, injustices against us. We were able to walk away from them and not have to be identified by them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I say that forgiveness, while it doesn't change the past, it should change the future. And
Mm.
uh, actually putting ourselves in these positions where we need to forgive the same person over and over, then we might have to look at some of these things called boundaries in our life. Like,
Right.
what are we? where are we at and how are we positioned with this person in our life to where they're continually able to create debts against us or
Right, right, right.
injustices against us, and
Yeah,
that's a whole other conversation.
right. Yeah, and we'll get into that too because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about
Hmm.
what does forgiveness mean and how does that play into boundaries. But I think going back to what you said about that uncomfortable idea of our forgiveness is linked in the teachings of Jesus, at least, with the forgiveness that God shows us. Like,
Mm,
I don't think it means, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it means that, like, if I come to faith in Christ and my sin is forgiven, then I can hold a grudge towards somebody and go, well, I'm not going to forgive them. And God's like, well, then I'm not going to forgive you. I mean, is that what it means? Or does it mean
yeah.
like that if I truly am saved, I will be a forgiving person. And if I'm really
Mhm.
not saved, then I'm not going to be a forgiving person.
Yeah, you don't want to fall into the ditch of like a works-based salvation where
Right.
it's like, okay, I need to go through and make a list of everyone that I maybe possibly have the slightest um, unforgiveness towards, or else I'm gonna,
Lose my
s-
salvation.
yeah, I'm gonna lose my
Yeah.
salvation or spend an eternity in hell. Like that's,
Right.
I don't think that's the thrust of his teaching. I think he's saying we're to be people who have this supernatural ability to forgive,
Yeah.
this tendency toward forgiveness. Um,
Like
because
forgiven people are forgiving people.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I have a tendency. There's people in my life that I'm not certain I have completely forgiven, but when they come to mind and those feelings of anger or resentment reoccur because it's something that I think it's kind of this constant battle. It's kind of like maintenance, I guess we could
Hmm.
say. Like when
Hmm.
you dwell on that and you think back on that and remember that injustice or whatever happened, we have to almost kind of like go back and say, well, am I forgiving them? Like, have I forgiven them? Am I willing to forgive them?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think as a 40-year-old man, there are things 20, 15, 20 years ago that I still have to reanalyze and say, have I truly forgiven in this area? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, we don't want to fall into that trap of thinking, okay, I know I better forgive everybody. I better do this. Better go back and find them and tell them I've forgiven them. And
Yeah. Or God's going to revoke my forgiveness somehow.
right, yeah,
Yeah. I think it's, I don't think forgiveness is a one and done thing. I think it's a daily
mhm,
lifestyle, or else Jesus wouldn't have said, every time you pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, right?
yeah,
I think we're constantly to be coming before the Lord every time we ask for his forgiveness and saying, Lord, if there's anybody that I need to forgive today,
mm,
help me to forgive them, right?
mhm,
And I think the whole 77 times or 70 times 7 is a metaphor for saying we shouldn't keep a running tally or list. We shouldn't be scorekeepers in the
mm,
sense of how many times we forgive. Now, we should be wise, and we'll talk about that as we talk about setting boundaries, right? To not enable abuse or not to continue to put ourselves in situations that would be harmful to ourselves and other people, right? But in terms of us keeping the score and saying, hey, there's a limit to how many times I'm going to forgive somebody, or there's limits to who I'm going to forgive.
mm,
I think Jesus's point was God doesn't set limits on us. Why would we set limits on other people?
right.
So let's talk about boundaries. When's the first time you heard somebody talk about boundaries?
Mm. It's actually a topic that comes up fairly regularly uh, in my circles because obviously, like being in a pastoral role, uh, there are people that will come to you and they need counsel, and they've had a lack of boundaries in their life.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it comes up, and it's like this kind of reoccurring theme that sometimes you have to walk people through
Yeah,
and kind of help them clarify and separate the idea of forgiveness and the pros of having good, healthy boundaries in your life with someone who's perpetually hurting you or taking advantage of you.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so boundaries. There's a great book called Boundaries, by the way. That's the first time I was exposed to this
Mm.
concept by a counselor friend of mine who encouraged me to pick this book up and read it. But a boundary is essentially just like are you typing? I'm hearing you
Yeah,
type.
sorry. I,
No,
I
you're good.
wanted to I wanted to find the author of the book.
Henry
This
Cloud and somebody else. I can't
Yeah,
remember who else.
John Townsend. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. Your mic switched over to like your computer mic, so
Oh
everything's
no.
louder. That's
Oh,
okay. That's no worries.
see if I can switch it back.
You're fine.
No, I can't.
You're good. Uh, so yeah, so like I have a property line, right? And a property line shows that like one part of this field belongs to me, it's my jurisdiction, and the other part belongs to my neighbor. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good, right?
Mm.
He knows he's not allowed to come over and like build a shed in my yard, and I'm not going to go over and build a shed in his yard, right? Because that's his and that part's mine. So in an interpersonal relationship, a boundary is what divides one person from the other so that I can have separate responsibilities than someone else. I can have separate privileges and identities than someone else. Um, I have a boundary in my relationship with my wife, right? There's things that it's just for me and my kids, right? It's not for other people to come in and trespass that boundary. Um, our home is open to anybody that needs to come in, but there are times when it's right for me to say, "Hey, we're not having guests over tonight. I need to spend time with just me and my family," right? And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be loving and caring for my wife and kids. So a boundary isn't necessarily me being selfish. It defines my expectation and shows respect both for me and that other person because if that other person is continually allowed to trespass that boundary, that's going to lead to a very toxic and unhealthy connection between me and them that isn't good for them. It's not good for me. And when we don't have boundaries, man, it can lead to things like uh, abuse. It can lead to dysfunctional, codependent relationships. It can lead to things like, we're continually being hurt. We're continually be taken advantage of, but we don't feel like we can say anything, right?
Mm.
So, what does setting a Christian like as a Christian? How might a Christian set a healthy boundary
Mm.
in a relationship? And we'll kind of tease this out and talk about forgiveness as we're going through. But what would example of that be for a Christian?
Yeah, I think it starts with someone who's maybe a good a mentor in your life,
Hmm.
um, and explaining to them the situation that's going on and asking, do I first of all, do I even need to set boundaries here? And if so, what kind of good practical boundaries would you set in this situation? Um, for instance, have a friend, an older friend who was being repeatedly asked for money by a distant family member,
Mm,
and um, she was already living on a small fixed income, um, and then came to Stacy and I about it and opened up about it and realized this friend is a very distant relative and they're likely using this money for various reasons. That they're constantly asking for loans, constantly asking for this and that. And we said, yeah, we're so glad you brought this to our attention. This seems like something you're almost enabling a certain set of behaviors more than helping this person,
mm,
and you're barely scraping by yourself. So opening up like that to people that you trust and know are godly people is really important. And I think the first step in setting boundaries, and then asking them, well, what kind of boundaries would be healthy here in this situation?
mm.
And kind of going from there, I think a wise man seeks a multitude of counsel. So
Sure.
it's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great example too of a family member or a person that you do care about that continues to ask you for help that would just enable them to behave badly.
Hmm. Yeah.
That would
And
be
every situation is different. It's case by
right,
case.
right.
It could be a mother or mother-in-law that is, you know, trying to influence grandkids in a way that you don't want them to be influenced. It could
Right.
be, man, there's a multitude of possibilities out there in terms
Mhm.
of where we need to, and so every boundary is going to look different because every
Right.
situation is going to be different. So,
Yeah, and it could also be, let's say you have a family member who you love dearly, but when they get around your spouse and they're with your spouse one on one, right? They
mm,
they talk down to them. They say hurtful things
mm,
to them. Right? And so a healthy boundary might be, well, I'm just not going to leave that person alone with my spouse, right? I'm going to
right,
be there every time they're there. That's the boundary, right? And
yeah,
they're not allowed to get that person alone and you know bully them or intimidate them or whatever. And we're gonna when that happens, we're gonna have that conversation. Hey, you just stepped over that boundary, and that's not okay. I love you. I forgive you, but you stepped over the boundary and that's not okay.
yeah,
And you're not allowed to do that. Right. Um, and that doesn't mean you do it with a sense of anger or swagger or vengeance. You do it in a respectful, Christ-like way, but you do have
mhm,
enough love for that person to hold them accountable.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing. That's kind of the misconception about boundaries is actually it's loving in both ways. It's
Exactly.
loving that person because you're teaching them self-awareness and
Mhm.
conscientiousness in setting those boundaries. You're teaching them how to be a better person.
Right.
And it's good to articulate that. Like
Mhm.
if you're in a pastoral ministry role and you want to sit down and have dinner with your family every night, you're going to have to tell that person who's calling or texting about everything that appears to be urgent or a crisis, then you realize maybe it's not. You need to tell them, "Hey, just so you know, my evenings are kind of reserved for my family unless it's a real emergency. Just
Mhm.
just shoot me a text about what's going on.
Mhm.
I'll look at it after we eat dinner and we'll go from there." But it's important to I think it's important to
Yeah.
articulate these boundaries, whatever they are,
Sure.
to this person so they know that the boundary is there
Right.
so that when they do cross it and you hold them accountable to that, they're not completely blindsided by that boundary.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think too, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to setting
Mhm.
boundaries.
Yeah.
So there is a way in which, as a pastor, and maybe this is just for pastors, any pastors listening, we can set boundaries sometimes by limiting the access that we give certain people to us,
Mhm. Mhm.
in the sense of not everybody has to get my personal cell phone number.
Right. Yeah.
I don't mind giving it away to people who I trust, right?
Yeah.
But if it's
Yeah.
somebody I just met and I can kind of tell, like, oh, like this is going to be a person who is unreasonable in their expectations of me,
Yeah.
then it's not wrong for me to say, hey, here's our office number. You can
Mhm.
call in the morning. And if you need to speak with me, our office manager can, you know, have me call you back on the office phone, or you can come in and set an appointment with me at a certain time, right? But I am not entitled, they are not entitled to have me just give them open season to trespass over my boundary just because that's what they're
Mhm.
demanding.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I have the right to recognize, hey, this is a fence that I can set up.
Mhm.
I can still show them love. I can still show them Christ-like compassion and gentleness and kindness without necessarily giving them everything they're demanding of me in this moment.
Right.
And so preventing someone trespassing your boundary often looks like just kind of recognizing maybe what that might turn into in the future because you don't know them yet, you don't trust them yet. And then kind of as they earn that trust going, oh, okay, well, this person's been super trustworthy. They've never caused me any reason to think they're gonna, trespass a boundary and do anything that would be inappropriate. So yeah, okay, I can give them my cell phone number. And if they need to call me on the cell phone, they can, right?
Yeah.
So here's the rub. Boundaries, I think, are frequently misunderstood, often by the younger generation. I'm not picking on you, Gen Z friends. We love you. Did a whole episode about you a few episodes ago. But there's something that greatly disturbs me, and it is sometimes I talk with younger folks who will say something to me like this: I had to cut that toxic person out of my life because they weren't life giving. And I just realized they were just awful and toxic and negative and terrible. And so I got no room for people in my life like that. So I'm just done with them. And then they'll say, boundaries.
Hmm.
And here's my concern. I'm not sure if that's what boundaries are, number one. And I'm concerned because I think it might be possible to disobey the word of God on this thing called forgiveness in the name of boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you share that concern?
Yeah. Yeah. I think people are can take the concept of boundaries and definitely misappropriate it
Yeah.
for the sake of just not wanting to do the hard work of uh, you know working through conflict.
Mhm.
So definitely,
So it's a lot easier just to cancel somebody.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In this day and age of just blocking people on everything,
Mhm.
it's so easy just to say I'm cutting them out of my life. They're like you said, they're toxic. Um, we even have like on social media, there's like toxic quizzes. How to know if the relationship is toxic. Um,
And it's always
yeah,
interesting to me that almost every young woman that goes through a breakup, when you ask them reasons why, they always say because he was abusive and narcissistic.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm not denying that there are men who are verbally abusive and narcissistic, but could it be that perhaps we've expanded that definition to a point where everyone who might be mean, we have said they're abusive?
Hmm. I
Because
feel like
when
it.
we
Well, I was just gonna say, I feel like this is better said in a Jordan Peterson voice.
could it be that perhaps it's early in the morning, I can't do Jordan. Could it be that perhaps we have expanded the definition of what it means? No, I don't have Jordan Peterson today.
Mm, not on it. Not on it this
No,
morning, huh?
gosh, no,
Can't do
I can't do it.
sorry.
I can do
Such a
Morgan
freaking
Freeman.
ooh.
We can do Morgan Freeman. There should be no such thing as Black History Month. Why
Mm,
isn't there Jewish History Month or White
mm.
History Month? You should forgive people. You better get busy living, or you better get busy dying. For everything else, there's MasterCard.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Jordan Peterson's just not here today, but Morgan showed up,
Yeah.
so we're happy
I
with
guess,
Morgan.
yeah, that's random,
Yeah.
but okay.
Okay, so here's my point. Um, Sometimes a boundary might mean you cut out someone in your life. Okay,
Mm,
not in a vengeful, resentful, mean spirited way. It might be that the abuse is so bad or the constant um, bad behavior is so frequent that the only way to set a boundary is to say to them, I love you, but right now I cannot have you in my life until this changes, right? Like
mm.
we can't be married as long as you're still using drugs and you're not getting help.
Yeah,
And so we can't, you can't be drunk dialing me at 3 in the morning. So I have to cut off contact with you until you go get some help. Right.
yeah.
So it may get to that. That's fine. That is you setting a boundary. And that's you being loving to that person of you saying, hey, go get help. Go, that's my boundary. I'm not going to continue to enable you. Right. But you saying to that person, there's uncomfortable conversations I'm not willing to have with you. And so I'm just going to cut you off forever
Mhm.
and cut you out instead of doing the work of saying, Lord Jesus, what does it look like to forgive this person?
Mm.
And God, if they don't need to be in my life in the way that they were in my life, how can I still show them love in a way that like maintains that healthy boundary so I don't enable them to behave poorly?
Yeah.
And so that's a tricky, and like you said, Gabe, I think that's probably best worked out in the context of getting counsel from somebody far wiser than us so they know our situation.
Mhm. Yeah. Is someone outside of the conflict who has no emotional investment in the conflict. So
Right.
those are some of the best people to give you advice on it because when we're emotional, we tend to make poor decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So the rub is if we forgive that person who's wronged us, isn't that the same as allowing them to trespass over our personal boundary and continue to wrong us, hurt us,
Mm.
or sin against us? Is forgiveness the same as allowing someone to trespass our boundaries?
No, no,
Okay, explain the
totally
difference.
different. Well, like we talked about the idea of leaving the nets, abandoning the nets. That's one component of biblical forgiveness is just not allowing yourself to be defined by that, not carrying that around you now that you have a new identity, uh, you're saying, "Oh, that's not me. I'm not
Hmm.
identified by that injustice that I can't go back and fix anyways." It's like, they say unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Mm,
Um, and um, that's different. So we can forgive and we can move on. We can abandon that. We can leave that. We can grant the person the release of that, but then also have those boundaries. Like I said, it's changing the future now. You can't change the past, but you can change the future and say, am I perpetually putting myself in a position where that person can, in a reoccurring way, take advantage of me and who I am in their life?
right.
Totally different.
Yeah. I think some of the common misconceptions that you see in some Christian communities that are very hurtful and detrimental is the idea that forgiveness just means turning a blind eye towards someone's sin.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that's what that means. I think I've heard people who have said to me they've been given that counsel before, perhaps even in their own marriage.
Mm,
Someone,
mhm.
the pastors tell me I'm just supposed to keep forgiving him. Like, okay, you are supposed to keep forgiving him, but when do you hold him accountable for the fact that he keeps getting drunk, and when he's drunk, he can be physically and verbally abusive, right? When does that
Right.
accountability step in? Well, I was told I just got to keep forgiving him. Okay, yes, but do you love him and your children enough to set that boundary to say, "Hey, I'm not going to live in a house with a man who gets drunk and puts his hands on me."
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so you can
Yeah.
forgive somebody, but at the same way, go, "Hey, I love you so much. I'm not going to continue to enable you to hurt other people and yourself." And I'm going to release this resentment. I'm not carrying resentment. I'm bringing it to the Lord every single day. But you got to get help, and I'm not doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I looked up some scriptures that would perhaps suggest that boundaries are actually a really good thing, and maybe we can unpack them.
Mhm.
Proverbs 13:20, the companion of fools suffers harm.
Mm.
Are we supposed to
Yeah.
forgive fools?
Well, it seems like we may have to forgive them,
Hmm.
but also, like Proverbs 4:14 says, "Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it to pass on." So it's like, yeah, I think we're supposed to forgive them, but also kind of come to our senses about certain people and avoid putting ourselves in these kind of vulnerable places with
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's nothing that says just because I forgive you that you and I have to be best buddies,
right. Yeah,
and I have to give you my friendship, my loyalty, my time, access to me. I forgive you, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean we're going to be like best friends. That doesn't mean we're going to walk together or I'm going to be your companion, because the Bible says the companion of fools suffers harm, and
yeah.
I don't want to suffer harm. And I don't want to walk in the way of evil or enter in the path of wickedness. And so, man, you're walking in a way that I just don't feel is wise for me. So I can love you from afar and love you like Christ without being your best friend.
Hmm.
And those are two very different things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Ephesians 5:11, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. I
Hmm.
think there's a way that we can take part in unfruitful works of darkness by enabling unfruitful works of darkness.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like in its immediate context, Ephesians 5 is speaking to a group of Christians who are living in a very pagan world, that there's a lot of dark arts and sorcery. The book of Acts says that when the gospel was spread to Ephesus, they brought together all their magic arts books and they burned them, and all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
But I think there's another understanding of unfruitful works of darkness. Like, um, if I'm in a friendship with somebody who is continually um, who is continually being rude and condescending and angry towards everybody around. Like if let's say I'm working with somebody that's like that and they're just being like rude, condescending, angry, mean spirited, and I'm not saying anything, and I'm just kind of through my silence being complicit with this person being an absolute monster, I am taking part somehow complicitly in unfruitful works of darkness, right?
Hmm.
But when I have the courage to stand up and say, "Hey, man, I'm not doing that, and I don't
Hmm.
think you should be doing that either." And I'm going to set this boundary to say, like, every time you do that, I'm going to love you enough to say, "Hey, bro, you got to stop. We're not doing
Hmm.
that," and I'm not going to do that either. So I'm not going to expose that in the sense of me delighting in calling you out or condemning you. But what I am going to say is that I love you enough to hold you accountable and say, "Hey, that's a work of darkness that I don't want to be a part of. So if you're going to do that, you do that, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And don't pull me into it. That's my boundary. You're not going to pull me into it. I love you. I forgive you anytime that's happened to me, but I'm not doing that."
Mm.
Does that check out? Do you think that's a
Yeah.
good application of that verse?
Yeah. And again, it's a very loving thing to do, is set boundaries with someone who has none. Um, Romans 12:18 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And I think that's important to understand this verse. We could misappropriate this verse, but living at peace includes setting up those boundaries to where you're at peace. And oftentimes you see this with family members who are
Hmm.
controlling. I have to counsel people who have a parent or a relative who want to exert control, and they're oftentimes manipulative, and
Right.
their attempts to gain control or influence into your life or your children's lives, and that's not peaceful to allow
Hmm.
them to do that. You're creating discord maybe within your marriage. um it's a very um it's like I said, sowing seeds of discord within your family.
Hmm.
To live at peace with everyone sometimes requires us to say, hey, let's take a step back from this, and let me just say, like, if you want to come over and spend time with the kids at the holidays, that's fine. Or if you want to, I'm going to ask that you get a hotel when you come to town.
Right. Sure.
um, or uh, hey, we're just taking phone calls for the kids once a week,
Right.
something like that. Or I'm going to be in the room.
Right.
Those are good, healthy boundaries, and you're allowed to do that.
Sure.
But like I said, every situation is different. Seek counsel in the situations, but that's how we will ultimately live at peace with everyone,
Hmm.
because not everyone's got your best interest in mind, believe it or
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting in that verse, it says, if it is possible, meaning
not.
there's some situations when, man, you could do everything
Hmm.
in your power to try to dwell peaceably with someone, and they just
Yeah,
don't make it possible, right? So
yeah,
sometimes it's just not possible, right? Sometimes there are some relationships that we do have to release and let go, right? And we're not canceling or cutting that person out of our life because we're being vindictive and petty and immature. It's just not possible to have that relationship right now, right?
yeah, yeah. We've exhausted all other options. Yeah.
Exactly. And then it says, as far as it depends on you, meaning, man, on my end, I've forgiven that person, I've shown love to that person, and I've done everything on my end to try to extend the olive branch to that person, but I can't make that person want and create reconciliation, right?
Mm, yeah.
So forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Those are two very different things.
Mm,
But even if we're unreconciled with a person, even if like things never got soothed over, even if that conflict never was resolved, as far as it depends on us, that bridge back is always open,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
I've said this before to a couple of people. I don't ever want to live my life with a list of people that I'm not talking to.
Right. Yeah.
That is a miserable way to live,
Mm,
especially as a pastor, man. Because like as a pastor, you have people that leave your church. Sometimes they leave your church and they're mad. And
Yeah.
then when you pastor in a small town, you're gonna run into those people again. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah. Yeah.
It's not like you can avoid it.
Yeah.
So if I let bitterness and unforgiveness and resentment, and I just keep this running tally of all the people that I'm not talking to, and
Hmm.
I'm gonna live in like just absolute paranoia and thinking every time I walk into the grocery store, I'm gonna run into somebody that did me wrong and did harm to me, and I'm not talking to that
Hmm.
person. That's a miserable way to live, man. As far as
Yeah.
it
You want to
depends
you
on
want to put your hood on and your sunglasses on and walk
right,
around
right,
in anonymity and stuff. And yeah,
yeah,
but I think it's important. That's a really good kind of picture of boundaries. You, like myself, have probably had to uninvite someone from your church.
I have, yes,
And it's a very tough thing to do, but that's a boundary. And
mhm,
so let's say that person was in the congregation, but they were creating a lot of discord. There was a lot of conflict that was emerging because of their selfishness
mhm,
or their pride. And you had to set a boundary. Hey, you're no longer welcome here at your current state. This stage that you're in, but um, here is a possible path of restoration.
right,
Um, I love you. I still care for you. And when I see you at Walmart, you know, and
mm,
I'm not going to avoid you at all costs. I'm going to
right,
maybe even approach you and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" This isn't me welcome you back into the church, but this is me showing that I still care for you, but I
right,
still have boundaries.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last verse that I just threw it in here because I thought it was interesting. Paul writes in 2 Timothy 4:14, Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds.
Hmm.
And we're not told the situation that happened with Alexander the coppersmith.
Alexander, man,
Man, Alexander the coppersmith, right?
he made it. That's he made it into the Bible
For that reason, he did
for
Paul
that
great
reason.
harm, right?
Yeah.
But Paul is the guy that wrote, "Be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ Jesus has forgiven you." So Paul wrote about forgiveness. Paul knew about forgiveness. Paul had been forgiven a great debt, and yet the wrongdoing of Alexander the coppersmith was so pronounced against Paul, possible as far as it depends on you, be at peace with everyone, that he felt necessary to write to Timothy and say, "Hey, this guy is somebody that we got to mark and watch out for," right?
Hmm.
And I don't think Paul was being vindictive. I don't think he was being petty. But
Yeah.
I just love to know what is that situation that happened, right?
Yeah.
And when might it get so bad that we have to tell people, "Hey, Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm."
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important too. It shows that sometimes our boundaries have to be articulated not only between us and the person we're setting them with, but
Mhm.
us and the leadership of the church, the
Right,
the hierarchy of those who are spiritual shepherds, and say, hey, just FYI, this person is perpetually manipulating or causing me distress or whatever, taking advantage of me.
right.
Just so you know, I have set the following boundaries with this person.
Sure, yeah,
And yeah, and I've articulated those boundaries to them. I just want to articulate them to you in case this becomes an issue down the road.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good application point in that. A couple years
Mhm.
ago, I had someone who was, um let me careful how I say this. This person was mentally not well,
Mhm.
and they had started attending our church, and for whatever reason, something snapped in this person and decided that, um, I don't know, that I was just the worst person ever, and so they went on social media, all on our, like, local community Facebook pages and just started posting pictures of me with my kids and talking about how terrible of a person I was and how awful I was and,
Mm.
like, writing all these lies about me. Um, and none of them were true. They were all, like, easy to see. Well, this person obviously has some issues that's causing them to create, scenarios in their head that never happened. and post that. They went on YouTube and recorded like 4 hours worth of videos where they're just talking all about, our church and all this
Wow.
stuff that never happened and all this, crazy stuff. And so, man, I forgave that poor woman because I know she wasn't in her right mind. I didn't hold any resentment against that poor woman, but I did have to kind of go on the record publicly and just say to people, hey, this is somebody that I wouldn't say necessarily an Alexander the Coppersmith, because we don't know if Alexander the Coppersmith was his right mind or not, but just kind of say, hey, like, this is the situation, and I'm not trying to talk bad about this person, but just publicly, just so everybody knows, to set the record straight, here's kind of what's going on with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's something like that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we'll know this side of eternity, but that's going to be one of the first things I ask Paul about. Hey, tell me about Alexander. What did he do? What if he gave him like a wedgie or something?
Yeah. Alexander standing right there next to Paul.
He's like, I made it somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me tell you my side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, good stuff. You got you don't have much plans today. You're just gonna be sitting in the snow, huh?
No. I think we're gonna try to hike through the snow to grandmother's house over the, what is the song?
Over the river and through the woods.
Yeah, there you go. To grandmother's house we go.
I would imagine that you guys don't have much snow gear.
We don't. Yeah, we have
No.
like tennis shoes, and I've gone through like all my tennis shoes because they're soaking wet,
Wow.
Then I have a pair of combat boots. I've been wearing those.
There you go.
Those have been a little bit drier, but it took me a while to actually like occur to me, maybe I should wear boots.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the boys have nothing. Like they just have tennis shoes, so they're just like going
Sheesh.
through their tennis shoes and soccer cleats and everything else in the snow, and
Man.
setting them. We have fireplace going up there, and
Yeah.
they're setting them out there to dry.
Wow.
It's been an interesting learning experience for sure. It's been
Yeah,
fun.
man. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Well, I hope you
I think we're
guys.
gonna go up there and we're gonna go up there to my mom's and hike up there and maybe eat some pancakes or pigs in a blanket, or I
Oof.
don't know what she's got planned, but
Oof. That sounds like a wonderful snowy day.
yeah.
Snowy day to grandmother's house.
Hey, you should be proud of me. I caught the Detroit Lions losing against the Washington Commanders. Is that the name of the team?
Yeah. Look at you.
I watched the whole game.
Wow.
Start to finish. Yeah.
Look at you. I am so proud of you, Gene Steratore.
And of course, like the one game that I catch that's not the Super Bowl and I watch, that the team I'm rooting for loses. And I'm like, what is the point of this?
Yeah. Well, it's a good start, though. It's a good start.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. There's so much to unpack with that, but maybe next episode we can do Super Bowl predictions and see what whose team you're going to root for in the Super Bowl. So that's awesome, man. Good job.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show. Thank you guys for listening, and thanks for the questions and comments and content suggestions. We love them. We're going to work our way through some of the content suggestions that were sent in January, the beginning of the year. So keep them coming, and we will see you guys next time. One of the things, let's see, Gabe, stick around because you had to get 2 takes.
Yeah, I hate that my microphone.
No,
I got this USB adapter on my MacBook.
And
if I just bump it with my hand,